Hello again. Can you believe we are 60% of the way through the course? That's amazing to me, but I've been doing a good bit of 5 and 6 week courses for the last almost 14 years, so that should not be a great surprise to me. 60% is a lot. So by now, I'm quite comfortable that you understand the operating budget of the institution. It's pretty solid. The slides have all been focused on the first one from Carnegie. We're focused on the entire picture, and we've tried to extract elements that I think you will, based on having been in this working with you in this program, you and your predecessors, for quite some time. I kind of get an idea of what sorts of information you seem to need, and that's pretty exciting. We're going to talk about a couple things today that we have not dealt with before. One we've not talked too much about is something called auxiliary budgets. And these can be budgets that the university considers to be very critical to its mission. One of the things that was a great concern, they're still having issues about it, is what are we going to do about athletics? Athletics is a contributor. It's a contributor in two ways. First, one or two sports pay for all of what they call the non-revenue generating sports. At Morgan, I don't know enough about the women's program. I'm sorry for that. I should. Their women's basketball is pretty strong at Morgan, so it may very well be women's basketball. But football pays the bills of a lot of other sports at Morgan State. So they don't when you lose part of your season, you lose income to the institution, which can be a real problem because the costs can continue. Okay, so another one type, I shouldn't say one, another type is auxiliary that has to be self-sustaining. And it could be things like the food service. I don't know whether Morgan's food service has to be self-sustaining. That has a lot to do with how much they charge the students. And there's always an issue because do the students consider the food to be worthwhile getting now? There's not as much fast food around the Morgan campus as I'm used to at virtually every other university where I've ever been. But there is some. We're a very mobile campus at Morgan, so people go out and they eat at other places, fast food and whatever else. But anyway, some have apartments as opposed to dorms, so they can do their own cooking. But another one that's very important, Morgan has just changed its direction. You probably don't use it very often because at the doctoral level, bookstores are usually not inordinately involved with things that you would buy unless you are buying things like souvenirs of the university. Give them to your parents, to your friends, to your significant others, whether they be your children, your nieces, nephews, whatever you have. They like to have hats and shirts and whatever have you. But by and large, the last school where I was for over 30 years, while I was doing work at these other institutions, predominantly part-time, that bookstore was run exclusively by the college. And so it had to pay all of its own expenses. It was even billed for heat, air conditioning, lights, etc. Now, Morgan was that way for the first 11 years I was at Morgan. But then the president, based on experience that Dr. Wilson had other schools, he said, I want to contract it out. So the point is, he provides heat, light, space for which the group that comes in pays him in effect what is rent, and so he only gets a portion. Thus far, I've not dealt with them enough to really be very judgmental, but very often it's contracting in bookstores. These folks don't understand that students are the most important product that the school has. They don't treat them the way in which, personally, I feel they should be treated. But anyway, you might want to be looking into that because that will certainly have an impact on you when you move up the chain of command from what you are now to a dean, to a vice president. And if the virus gets in, I don't mean corona, if the virus gets in you to be a president, you really will have to deal with that kind of thing on a day-to-day basis. So think seriously about separating in your mind between operating budgets and auxiliary budgets. And just say a word or two about, normally I save this until the next unit, but I don't think I'm going to do that. Yes, I will. because I got a couple other things to cover here, and I don't like these things. When I first started to do these, they used to run very long, 30 to 45 minutes. The students were very generous and very nice. They said, "You're fine," but we took a course this way. Didn't want to look at your face. That doesn't bother me. So we've adopted down to make it highlighting of what's going on in the unit. I'll come back to the issue of construction in just a bit. I do want to talk a little bit about something else that's important, and that is assessment. Assessment, you say, well, what's that got to do with budget and finance? It's got a lot to do with budget and finance. The most important one is with the Middle States Association of Colleges and Schools. I assume most of you have some familiarity with it. It happens to be one that you pay a membership, and it's a peer review process where you pay for peer group to come in a full committee every 10 years, but you do what we used to call in my trade a bench audit every 5 years. But they can also send in teams. If there's any issue that they get concerns about, they can send in a topical team, but you pay for that. And you also have to support if you have a team coming, you pay the support for that. And you also have to provide support for the people on your staff whose primary job is teaching, research, and service. And sometimes you have to actually pay them overload work to take over. For example, at Morgan, I'll move to the next kind of one. The next type you have are for what we call third-party accreditation. Your social work program has that. Your business program has that. Your teacher education program has that. They come in a little more often. They're a little more in-depth in one specific area. For example, the three that I mentioned. And someone who is on the steering committee of any one of those three is going to be given either release time, which has a monetary implication, or actually be paid. The chair getting even more because the chair does an awful lot of work. I have done that on 2 separate occasions for 2 different schools, and if you're honest about it, you're making about $3 an hour when you do it. But that's one of the things you have to look at. How is that being handled? Because it is very critical. The Fed, U.S. Department of Education, right now there's debate. Should those regional accreditations like Middle States still be around, or should there be some other model? Right now, Betsy DeVos, who's our Secretary of Ed, is pretty much supportive of the third-party accreditation. We don't know. I'm not quite sure if President Trump has a full grasp of what it is, but frankly, if he was happy with something, and Middle States came in and said no, that he probably wouldn't care for that. Just watching his behavior for the last 3 years. Okay, so that basically gives these things to look at. I'm going to reiterate them very quickly. That auxiliary budget, in both kinds, those that are self-sustaining and those that are contractual. You ought to be very familiar with them. You ought to at least have identified one in your own mind so you can see how that differs from the operating budget. You also need to look at the issue of, I missed one. I'm sorry. Give me a quickie on this one. By now, you've looked at at least three major modes of the type of budget. They're in the text. I'm not going to repeat them. I'd like you to give me a thought. Just make it as an addendum to one of the short papers you're doing. What model of the ones you're seeing in the operating field is where this normally is found? Which one are they using? And what is your reaction? Do you think, having read about the others, they might be worthy of some attention or not? And finally, the whole idea of planning and assessment. The financing that goes with the whole assessment part becomes more, it seems like, every year. Okay, we're now, as I said, we're coming up to the last video that I will do, and I hope you found these useful.